Welcome, everybody. We're here today to talk about housing first and harm reduction. We'll start with let you know who we are. My name is Andrew Spears. I am the Director of Training and Technical Assistance at Pathways to Housing PA, and I am joined by my colleague, Jeff Jackson. Jeff, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Jeff Jackson. I'm the Senior Team Leader for the Opiate and Substance Use Teams from Pathways to Housing PA.
Awesome. And we're going to tell you a lot more about Pathways and the work that we both do here as we progress. So just to get started, what we're going to review in the next hour, we're going to give you a brief overview of housing first and harm reduction. Housing first, the model can be a training in and of itself that could be 4 hours long, same with harm reduction. So we're really just going to kind of gloss over the basics of what you need to know about those models so we can get towards the application of those models and the theory to practice, right? We're going to dispel some common misconceptions, some myths that we hear about housing first and harm reduction in the field. We're going to talk about some common challenges in implementing these models in this practice. We'll talk about what preserving relationships looks like, both with our landlords, our community, and with our participants, especially when we're encountering, clinical challenges. We'll talk about safety and communication and participant self-determination and how all of those things kind of intertwine and intersect. And then we're going to do some Q&A. Admittedly, I often talk a lot more than I think that I'm going to and end up eating up Q&A time. So we'd also encourage folks to be entering questions or comments in the chat as we move throughout the presentation, and we can answer those, in real time as we go through. So if you have a burning desire to ask something, please just go ahead and do that. And if it's something we'll cover on a subsequent slide, I'll let you know. But yeah, so to get started, I imagine some of the folks that are here today already know what housing first is, but if you're brand new to it, here's the nitty gritty. Here's what you really need to know. Housing First is an evidence-based program model, right? It was founded in New York City in 1992 by clinical psychologist Dr. Samson Barris. The model assists individuals experiencing chronic homelessness who are living with serious persistent mental illness and or a substance use disorder. Housing First immediately offers rental subsidies and permanent supportive housing to people with no preconditions or barriers whatsoever, right? So no requirements around sobriety or taking medication, and there's no endpoint to the services either. It's permanent supportive housing. The supports are present for an individual as long as that individual is in need of those supports. Now, once we get someone off the street and into an apartment, then we provide them with the wraparound supports that they need to maintain their housing. So it's housing first, not housing only. We don't just stick somebody in an apartment and leave them there to their own devices without any help or support. Once they're there, we start working on all of the other goals that they have, addressing all of the other kind of biopsychosocial issues going on in that person's life, and help them maintain that apartment once they get it. Well, I'd be remiss to also not talk about specifically our program, Pathways to Housing PA. So we were founded in 2008. The city of Philadelphia asked us to bring the housing first model to help end chronic homelessness in Philadelphia. Since that time, we have grown to over, we have 7 clinical teams now. We're housing over 550 participants all over the city of Philadelphia. Jeff, do you want to talk a little bit about launching teams 7, 8, and 9, since that's really your area of expertise?
When I started, Team 7 was already open. Am I echoing?
Nope, you sound good to me.
Team 7 was already started, but it was in a new team, a new concept to house individuals who were homeless, who had substance use disorder and opiate use disorder. The city did come to us after they saw how successful it was with getting people off the street and becoming successful. I mean, in their terms, as when I say successful, as far as getting them, most people into treatment, sustaining their housing, because we have an 85% retention rate. here at Pathways to Housing. And for the opiate use disorder teams, it's actually 95% success rate for retention of someone in the housing, and over 60% of our participants come on within the first 6 months of being housed, and they enter some kind of MAT treatment. So with that success, we were asked to do a team 8 that I also, played a part in launching, and a team 9 that's not just opiate based, it's actually a substance use disorder team. So we have people with K2, cocaine, alcohol, benzodiazepine use, and some severe mental health issues also.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Jeff. So, housing first, the 5 key principles are really the thing that you need to know if you're brand new to the model, right? So housing first, immediate access to permanent housing with no housing readiness requirements. We're not saying this person needs to check off X, Y, and Z before we can put them in an apartment. They don't need to start taking their meds or, get into treatment first. They don't need to sign all of the documentation if their mental health is interfering with their ability to do that. They don't have to do anything, really. They have to agree to sign the terms and conditions of a standard lease, and they have to agree to let a staff member visit them in the home at least once every 2 weeks. The second key principle is participant choice and self-determination. So housing first is really, it's person-centered at its core. We're really concerned with promoting the inherent worth and dignity of all people. Our housing is based on client preferences and availability. Our participants usually get to see between 1 and 3 apartments before they decide where they want to live and in what neighborhood they're going to live. And the participants really guide what services they access and when they want to start. Housing First also employs this multiple pathways of recovery orientation, which means we don't force abstinence or treatment on anybody. We include peer support, harm reduction. Obviously, we're going to talk a lot about that today. And it really just recognizes holistic well-being for individuals. Similar to participant choice and self-determination is individualized and participant-driven supports, which means we're not using standardized policies because we believe that ignores individual experience. There is no one-size-fits-all approach to the work that we're doing, and we, incorporate choice into all areas of our programming as often as possible. And then the last key point being social and community inclusion. We don't believe that housing should stigmatize people or isolate people. We want to encourage ways for individuals to reintegrate into their community following homelessness and get them connected to meaningful social activities. So that might be cultural, spiritual, civic engagement, rekindling relationships with family and friends, employment, vocational, recreational activities, and things of that nature. Jeff mentioned some of the benefits of the Housing First model already, right? Most Housing First programs you're going to see have an 85 to 90% retention rate, housing retention rate after 5 years, which is pretty good, right? We also know that Housing First is cost effective, that it reduces hospitalization time for individuals, it increases participant satisfaction. Housing First programs are quick and easy to start up because especially when you're using a scattered site model and you're accessing apartments, market rate apartments all over the city, it's pretty easy to get somebody in from off the streets fairly quickly. There's the wider community benefit of not having folks living unsheltered, and it eliminates the need for more expensive programs, right? So when folks get into a Housing First program, we see their CBH hospitalizations decrease. We see their emergency room visits decrease. We see their engagements with the Philadelphia prison system decrease. And all of those things are a lot more expensive than getting somebody into an apartment and then surrounding them with the intensive support. I would be remiss not to mention that, Housing First, it kind of sounds easy, right? Like, oh, we just get somebody in an apartment, we surround them with supports. But a lot of people use elements of Housing First without actually practicing the full Housing First model, right? Without those 5 key principles, it's definitely not Housing First. But high fidelity housing first actually requires adherence to 38 individual principles in 5 categories. So the less of those boxes you're checking, the less fidelity you have to the model, and you might not see the same 85 to 90% housing retention rate that a high fidelity model would produce, if that makes sense. Are there any mandatory requirements for the participants, such as case management? Is a question that we just got asked in the chat. Jeff, do you want to field that one? You look like you were about to say something.
Well, as far as case management, one of the principles is you have to see a participant at least once every 2 weeks in their unit to have that direct support. So that is a requirement of some of the funders who are helping fund the model itself.
Yep. So that bi-weekly home visit and the willingness to sign on to a standard lease is really the 2 main requirements for program participation. Everything else is really considered optional. The idea is that we want to create relationships and opportunities for folks to engage in treatment that feel exciting and are appealing to our participants. We don't want to do things to them or for them. We want to do things with our participants, so eventually they can begin to do things on their own. So there is the element of choice embedded into the model.
There was another question about, would this model be successful in a rural area versus urban? You want to take that, Andrew?
So, I mean, I think the model can be successful with any population in any area. It depends on what resources are available, though. So there's obviously going to be different considerations in a rural area. In Philadelphia, we can, have someone placed in an apartment in Southwest Philly, and our offices are in North Philadelphia, and they can hop on SEPTA and get to our offices if they really need to. I don't know what transportation, public transportation is like in a rural area. So, or your specific rural area, right? So making sure that the units are nearby where folks are accessing services, where, their doctor's offices, their family members. I think there are definitely unique challenges, but the model itself, there's no reason why it wouldn't work in that setting if you're able to make sure that you can meet folks' needs and get them to where they need to go and they have access to the services.
The support's the key.
Yep. So I gave you the little housing first, quick and dirty. And so let's talk about harm reduction. And then we're going to get into how do housing first and harm reduction really intersect and interact, and what does that look like, the practical application. So harm reduction recognizes that people make their own choices based on their options, what's available to them, and what feels right for them, right? Harm reduction doesn't ignore risky behaviors. It acknowledges them in a non-judgmental way so we can have open and honest conversations with our participants. Then it takes it a step further, and we identify practical ways of lessening the consequences of high risk or risky behaviors for the individual. And we can apply harm reduction in all areas, right? It's not just substance use. It applies to mental health and other behavioral health concerns. Harm reduction does not mean that anything goes. It doesn't condone, endorse, or encourage drug use or high-risk behaviors. It doesn't exclude or dismiss abstinence-based treatment models either, right? So we're not saying, you have to go to treatment or, treatment isn't an option either. If that's something that the participant expresses interest in, we make that available to them. But it's not a conversation that's ever forced or required of our participants in our program. And we also don't gloss over, minimize, or ignore the harms that are associated with drug use, sexual activity, or other risky behaviors. In fact, we want to acknowledge them, we want to talk about them, and then we want to find ways of lessening the risk for those individuals. Did you have anything to share from your personal experience on how we use harm reduction at Pathways, Jeff?
Well, I know for the opiate use teams and the substance use teams, a lot of our participants are at first apprehensive on coming into the model because it's so different than what they've been used to. When you say to them in a non-judgmental way, it's okay, We still want to house you. And, you don't have to stop using today to get this housing. You don't have to stop using today to get this housing. You don't have to stop doing your illicit sexual activity or sex work to get this housing. That non-judgmental way of communicating with the participant is vital to establishing that rapport that can help get that success that you want down the line.
Absolutely. I think, because of social stigma around substance use, around mental health, around survival sex work, things of that nature, participants that we're engaging with in these programs are really used to hiding this information about themselves, right? They're used to their ability to access services being contingent on what others deem as, making good decisions or having good behavior, right? And so when they come into a housing first or a harm reduction program, a lot of folks are not used to talking openly and honestly about these types of behaviors. And we're really limited in our ability to, help lessen the consequences of some of this stuff. And by consequences, I mean health issues, right? Or mental health distress. We can't meet those needs for individuals if we don't really know what's going on. And so Housing First and Harm Reduction both seek to encourage an openness and an honesty in the exchange between our participants and our providers so that we can best meet their needs. When practiced effectively, harm reduction increases our trust with clients. It increases their engagement with our programs. It improves public health for both individuals and the larger community, and it challenges the stigma that's already associated with these behaviors. So what does it look like? That all sounds very nice, right? But what does it look like to actually practice Housing First and harm reduction in real life with real people and within the systemic context that we all exist and work in, right? First and foremost, housing itself is harm reduction. The goal in applying harm reduction to the Housing First model is to keep people safe in their homes. So automatically getting someone off the street and into an apartment, they're going to be safer and healthier than they would have been living unsheltered outside, right? The program suggests and has proven that providing a person with Housing First creates a foundation where the recovery process can actually begin. Having a place of one's own in and of itself often serves as a motivator for individuals to refrain from drug and alcohol use or modify their relationship to those substances. So when someone is housed, we can focus on the reduction of specific behaviors or patterns through kind of low profile housing retention coaching, right? So for example, if we have a landlord that's getting continuous complaints from neighbors about one of our participants who's partying with their friends, into the wee hours of the morning every weeknight, our staff could suggest that the participant move the party to another location. Perhaps, every now and then they can go have their gathering at a friend's house instead. Or, we can say, hey, the landlord's really taken notice or the neighbors are really complaining. Maybe you can, after 10 p.m., turn the music down, kind of keep it undercover a little bit. Maybe you want to invite your friends over on a Saturday night instead of a Thursday night, right? When our individuals have been living outside, unsheltered, or not had a place of their own in a really long time, they might not necessarily know what it means to be a good tenant, right? So part of our job as service providers is to help teach them that. We can also set up systems to reduce risk. If we know that someone is getting their SSI check on the first of the month and all of their money is gone by the third, and the rest of the month they're struggling to pay for food and other necessities, we can talk to folks about representative payee-ship or setting up a budget so that we can make things last, right? And we know that if folks are not spending all of their money in the first couple of days of the month on substances, we're also reducing the risk of overdose, right? For moving things out over a 30-day period instead of like a really intensive 2-3 days of use. Another thing that's important to notice, we cannot expect overnight miracles, right? Somebody doesn't like I mentioned, move into a house and automatically know what it means to be a good tenant when they've never had a place of their own before, right? There's this normalizing context of being in the community. By being in the community, folks learn what it means to be a good community member, right? But they don't know what that is until they've had that experience. You know, social workers are always saying we need to meet people where they're at, or human service providers, meet people where they're at. But we don't want to meet them where they're at and then leave them there, right? We want to talk to our participants about what are their goals, what do they want to do differently, and how can we assist, right? We're not putting somebody in an apartment and then, you know, just leaving them there to watch television and smoke cigarettes all day. We want to use motivational interviewing and figure out what kind of goals that person has and how we can assist them in attaining those goals. Again, the program is highly individualized, and folks are choosing what kinds of services they want to access and when. They're identifying what their goals are, and the staff are there to support them in meeting those goals. But we're not defining, you know, we think that before you can get a job, you need to go see the pulmonologist. We're letting our participants kind of chart their course for what order they want to address things in. Because when we're actually focused on their goals and not our own ideas of what their goals should be, folks are going to be much more motivated to go after them. And finally, in Housing First, using the harm reduction approach, we're looking for a functional house, not a beautiful house, right? A beautiful house is great, is ideal. But that's not the end goal, right? We don't need all of our participants' homes to look like your home or my home might look like. That's us projecting our values onto our participants. We need to make sure that the house is functional, though, right? House is not functional if it's infested with roaches or mice, right? But a house is still functional even if it's dirtier than we'd like it to be. When the dirtiness starts turning into a pest problem, right, then it's no longer functional. So that's an important point to push, I think, because when folks are newer to Housing First and they walk in and they're like, ooh, I wouldn't necessarily like to live in this environment. You know, we can talk to our participants about health and hygiene, but as far as what their apartment looks like, functional, not beautiful, is the goal. Jeff, do you have anything to add here?
Well, I know that communication is key from the very beginning when you're doing outreach to try to talk that participant into, you know, coming in off the streets. And throughout that whole process, while you're building that rapport, it's finding out, does this person know how to live on their own? Have they ever lived? Do they have any fears? If you start building that trust and that relationship there, and then you add in the supports, and early on when you house someone, you know, we found that, I know I have and our team has, the more engagements, the better. Even though it's 2 times a month is required, we would do 2 times a week the first month or so, just to let them know that we're here for you. Any fears, any concerns, how can we help take away your anxiety and help make this transition smoother?
Yep, I think that really speaks to the highly individualized piece, right? We have our requirements from our funders about how often we need to see folks. But you know, we have many participants that we see on an almost daily basis because that's the level of support that they need. If somebody needs that level of support, typically we move them into an apartment that's very close to the office, right? So it's easy for us to check in on them every day, or for them to come over to the office to maybe pick up their daily medication if that's something that they struggle with. So, you know, there's no set of prescriptive rules. There's the fidelity measures, right? But the way that we apply the model to our participants is highly individualized so we can meet people's specific needs. So I really see like harm reduction and Housing First boiling down into 3 main supports, or 3 main points: providing support, educating and informing, and recognizing choice. So we provide support for our participants at any stage of recovery, right? Folks who are experiencing like really chaotic use to folks that are maybe only occasionally dabbling in substances, but when they occasionally dabble, it causes a problem, right? We recognize folks come in at different stages of recovery, and we meet them there based on where they want to go, right? Our intervention should be individually tailored to where participants are in that stage. When I say recovery, I mean, this can be about substance use, it can be about mental health, it can be about any of the high-risk behaviors that we mentioned, right? We're always going to offer as much support as possible, as many resources as possible, but we're going to respect it if our participants decline and they say, I'm actually not ready to do that yet. Doing so builds a lot of trust and gains, you get more rapport with your participants when you're not pushing them into things that they don't want to do. So when they become ready to do something maybe new and challenging, they're trusting that they're not going to feel extra pressure from their team. When people want treatment, we need to be ready to pounce on that and provide immediate access. There are not enough flexible treatment spots in Philadelphia to keep up with the need. By necessity, we've become a treatment provider, right? We have an integrated care clinic on site that offers low barrier MAT induction for individuals that want to go that route. Jeff, do you want to talk about maybe how many of our participants are doing that?
We have over 60% of our participants who are on MAT. The integrated care clinic, even though it's unique to us, it's ideal because, like you said, the low barrier, not having the obstacles when someone wants to get treatment. We offer Suboxone, Vivitrol, and other healthcare also. So when someone's ready for it, if you can't provide it, it can be a barrier to where they think, oh, the system's let me down again. So our clinic is unique in that way to be right on site for us.
Yep. And I think it's remarkable that we're seeing 60 to 63% of our participants starting some form of treatment, whether it's inpatient, outpatient, MAT, within 6 months of getting housed. Nationally, the statistic is about 20% of people with an opioid use disorder ever seek treatment. And that's people who have never experienced homelessness, who don't have, co-occurring disorders. So we've more than tripled that rate. So I think that really goes to show the effectiveness of housing first, right? When you meet people's basic needs and then work up from there, really amazing things can happen. So the second piece, educating and informing, right? We need to educate ourselves on the needs of the people that we serve. If someone is coming to us for support for case management services and we don't know how to help them access detox or treatment or other lower intensity interventions, that's a problem, right? We have to also acknowledge that in a lot of cases, treatment practices haven't caught up with the most MAT providers still won't prescribe to anyone that's using benzos, whereas on the street, everyone is taking Xanax and Valium on top of opioids, right? And so sometimes that also means educating the providers that we work with and partner with on harm reduction, right? We need to keep this person alive for another day if they want to get treatment and access recovery supports. And if folks can't prescribe based on these kind of like rigid ideas of what's okay and what's not. Anyway, we also want to be providing judgment-free information and education for individuals who use substances, right? This is harm reduction. We want to be talking to folks about the risks of particular substances. We want to talk about safer usage practices, right? So maybe that's a method of consumption. Maybe we talk about snorting a substance rather than injecting a substance. There's going to be a lower risk of overdose there, right? We might talk about instead of using heroin, we see a lot of folks that are transitioning to, medical marijuana as a way to kind of get away from, rather than total abstinence, you have to stop using everything. Using a lower risk substance can often be effective and helpful for people. We're always talking about overdose awareness, prevention, and safety planning. Jeff, will you mention the overdose prevention goal plan that you do with everyone on your teams?
Everyone on our teams, actually the substance use teams and the opioid use disorder teams, gets an overdose prevention treatment plan. And basically it's the conversation and a plan set up to help someone be mindful of the risk of overdose. So like we have someone says their plan could be not to use alone. You know, they'll use with a friend or someone who to make sure that they have their Narcan, that, you know, they're monitoring them. I mean, it's not a safe injection site type thing, but it's individually meeting that person where to say, hey, you know, we want to make sure you're okay until you're ready to say, I'm done with using.
Yep. And then the third piece, recognizing choice, right? Participants are allowed to make choices in these programs. They're allowed to make a choice to use alcohol or not, to take medication or not. And our staff don't shield individuals from the consequences of those choices, right? Our clients make their own decisions. They observe the results. Sometimes they like the results, sometimes they don't. And then the ball's in their court, right? We recognize that change can take many months, often entails many failures. But in a housing first harm reduction approach, our staff are not abandoning our folks when things get hard, right? We recognize that relationships over time hit bumps in the road occasionally, and that's okay. We're going to show up, we're going to walk alongside that participant. We're not going to treat them differently. We're not going to threaten their housing. We're going to make sure that they know that help is always available when they're ready to do something different. Judgment-free services and service provision is really a key here, right? Shame is built into our culture. Our participants have been fed messages of shame from everyone in society, right? From strangers on the street, their families, and other providers, right? Shame doesn't help people heal. I love this quote from Brene Brown, who says, shame corrodes the very part of us that believes that we're capable of change. So it's not our job as providers to shame our clients, but to support them no matter what. When we walk through the doors of our places of employment, we're making a commitment to help, right? Stressful events are inevitable in a long-term relationship. We don't view relapse or incarceration or hospitalization as a disruption of services or a termination of services. We acknowledge that it's a stressful event. We deal with it. We walk alongside our clients until we get to the other side. And during that process, we're building trust and rapport. We call this, kind of like accountability without termination. So clients are facing the natural consequences of their actions, but that doesn't mean that we walk away and abandon them. Right? Jeff, do you want to talk about some of the examples of harm reduction that we use in our work?
I mean, one of the examples we use is when we develop the plans where we talk about harm reduction of not using alone. Like, where are you using at? A lot of our participants was homeless and they would use in the street where there was actually people around. Now you have an apartment, you have a unit where you could be in there by yourself. That's a high risk behavior. You may take a drug that has some fentanyl in it that could make you overdose and nobody's aware of it. So we do have conversations, and I think the key to this model is the conversations and the building of the trust where a person feels that you're not being judgmental and they can openly talk about what's going on, and then we can have more success in trying to attack how to help.
Awesome. So, the goal of Housing First and Harm Reduction is meeting the needs of people you work with, some of whom may engage in high-risk behaviors. And the other goal is saving people's lives, right? People can't recover, people's lives can't get better and improve if they're not alive, right? If they're not here with us. A lot of the limitations or challenges that people experience in trying to implement these models, especially when you're new to it, is, discomfort with your participants disclosing risky behaviors, disparities in lived experience. If you haven't gone through some of the things that your participants have gone through, you might not always know what to say or how to respond. This is one of the reasons why using certified peer specialists in your programs or recovery specialists is so important, right? That lived experience and that ability to say, hey, I've been there, this is how I got through it, and share some of that commonality is really, really important to both harm reduction and housing first work.
There's a question,
great.
Is the housing part of the program funded by HUD? If so, if a person goes to jail for more than 90 days and loses their homeless status, can they still come back to housing? Well, there's a few different kind of HUD grants, number one. There are a few that does have the 90-day limit to where they could lose their status. And you'd have to try to work on regaining their homeless housing status. There's also right now with the COVID, they've been given, we're fortunate enough to have waivers for people who are incarcerated because the system is so delayed and court dates are getting pushed back that the 90-day has been waived in most cases. So we're fortunate right there in that aspect. But depending on what state and what grant it is, the 90 days can affect the participants' stay and their status.
Thanks for feeling that, Jeff. Let's dispel a couple of misconceptions about harm reduction in housing first, right? I'm sure y'all have seen this before. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? This is a motivational theory in psychology that says, needs lower down on the hierarchy have to be met before individuals can attend to these higher up needs, right? So basically, folks can't achieve their full potential unless their basic needs, safety, security, food, water, warmth, rest, those things need to be met first, right? So we know that folks are not going to pursue treatment or sobriety if they don't have a place to sleep, if they don't know where their next meal is coming from, and if they don't feel safe. People will criticize harm reduction by saying it encourages drug use. We have significant literature that refutes that claim. It'll say that people will say it sends mixed messages to people about what we want them to do or need them to do. I would argue harm reduction acknowledges reality, right? We know that we are powerless over the actions of other people, right? And so we can say, this is what you're doing. Here's the way that doesn't match up with the goals that you said you had. We can acknowledge the disconnect between someone's stated goals and their behaviors, right? But we want harm reduction to acknowledge reality because we need to help folks with the reality of what's going on for them. And other people will say that it fails to get people off substances, harm reduction, right? But we know that abstinence is not the primary goal for everybody. And we're mainly concerned with reducing harms. So a problem, right, around a lot of linear residential treatment programs or models is that housing is offered as a reward for compliance with treatment. The flip side of that means that people are punished for displaying symptoms of the issues that qualify them for treatment in the first place, right? So if somebody has a substance use disorder and they can't stop using, so the substance use disorder qualifies them to be in this treatment program, right? But then they have a relapse or a recurrence of use, and we say this person's not ready for housing. We're punishing them for displaying a symptom of the disease that qualifies them for treatment, right? Same with mental health. We say we can't move this person into an apartment until they take their medications. Well, a lot of the times, non-compliance with medication is a symptom of the mental health disorders that people are struggling with. So why would we then say you don't deserve a place to live because you're exhibiting a symptom of the thing that qualifies you for treatment, right? It's unethical, it's coercive, right? And it's punishing folks for things that they're not actually in control of. Another thing is this whole myth of rock bottom, right? How do we measure rock bottom? Rock bottom can only be determined after it's happened, right? Retrospectively. We don't know rock bottom when we're there, when we're in it. So we can't measure it for ourselves or for other people. And we know that, if rock bottom were the best place to recover, recovery rates would be higher for people that are living outside on the street unsheltered, or incarcerated, or having poor health status, all of these things. But that's just not what we see. There's this great article that came out in 2018 called "Why It's Not Enabling to Make Drug Use Safer." And the author said, if making life worse for people is the best way to spur recovery, poor folks, homeless people, and prisoners should be the most likely to succeed in treatment. But again, research shows that people with more resources and support do better, which is why housing first then is as effective as it is. There's lots of fears about housing first, and I'm worried about our time, so I'm going to skip over these and let's get to the practical application of this, right? And what are the challenges that we see when we actually do housing first work with real people in the field. Jeff, you want to talk about some of these? Because I know you've got firsthand experience with all of them.
Frequently missed home visits. I mean, there are a lot of times, actually on a daily basis, where we have participants who don't be in the unit. Through supervision with the staff, as a supervisor, I have to let my staff know, hey, where do we go find them at when they were homeless? What were some of their, panhandling spots? Go into the community, and we would try to engage them in the community, because we want to let them know, our participants know, that we're not giving up on you, and it's persistence. It's something that's going to happen. And again, we reiterate, the home visit is a requirement. It's, it's the 2 home visits a month is what's required. And it's just an ongoing battle when I say battle, it's ongoing challenge to get the participant to see that. But at the same time, when they don't, we don't just say, okay, you're not here and we're done. We'll try again in 2 weeks. No, we'll go back the next day. We'll go back the next day and let them know we're here. And eventually our participants do start to get more consistent with the home visits.
Y'all could read the slide. I don't need to read it out loud to you, but all of the things on this slide, we don't look at them as problematic behaviors or non-compliance. These are clinical issues that need to be treated by members of the clinical team during the visits, during the interactions, right? The challenge is to engage someone around these things if they don't really want to talk about it, right? So that's where the trust and the rapport comes in. And that's where we look at the stated goals and the behaviors and the way that those things don't match up. Our goal is always to keep people safe and healthy and remaining in their house, right? So we look at the ways that behavioral issues that are coming up are maybe challenging their tenancy. Lots of folks have a community of other people experiencing homelessness, and they feel guilty when they get into a place and they want to bring all their people along with them. We end up doing a lot of eviction of third parties from time to time. We also have individuals who will have their apartments that are, taken over by drug dealers. That doesn't mean that we punish the individual who was taken advantage of by taking their housing away, right? A thing that I think is important to note for folks is the housing first model anticipates and turnover of the initial apartment, right? Folks don't know how to be a good tenant overnight. So we see that, maybe 60 to 70% of the time, folks aren't going to be successful in the first apartment. We plan for that, right? We budget for that. We do have to spend a little extra money on evictions or turnovers, right, for a lot of new folks. But we find that the turnover from a second to a third apartment decreases exponentially, right? That we only see that happening around 20, 30% of the time. So.
And with communication of the need to at least look at and talk about the behaviors.
Yep.
It's important. It's important to talk about, the disruptive guests, to ask them what would they consider a good tenant? What do they, how do they view themselves ideally in this unit? How can we get them there? You have to have that ongoing conversation for some of the behavior changes to start working, or you're going to run into the same problems over and over, to where the frustration level or the finances can get so costly where a program might think that this is not working for the person, when some communication consistently, and training your staff on understanding that there's going to be some, setbacks, but we anticipated it, we budgeted for it, and let's keep pushing forward to help the individual.
Yep. We had a question in the chat. What constitutes dismissal from a program with this model? It's pretty hard to get dismissed from Pathways. Really, we see violence against staff members or direct threats against staff members that can't be talked out, or repeated threats that can be a cause for somebody to be discharged. But even when that happens, we are not just leaving people hanging. We're connecting them to other appropriate resources for follow-up, right? Sometimes folks move out of state to be closer to friends and family. In that case, they're outside of our service area, and we're gonna, get them connected to supports where they are. Sometimes after repeated evictions, it may turn out that somebody is actually a better fit for congregate housing. We'll get them into a program and we'll maintain their case management. So they'll become a service-only client.
There's a few questions. One is asking about, can we give more detail about how to address overflowing sink or tub issues? We talked about that in a training yesterday, day before, Andrew, where we had one participant who kept flooding a unit that was on the 3rd floor, and it would flood out the 2nd floor. We actually moved the unit to a 1st floor unit. We moved the participant to a 1st floor unit. We had to think outside the box here because the mental health issue that this person had. We also installed, what was that, Andrew?
The kind of faucets you see in a public bathroom that turn off after a while.
Exactly. That was good thinking outside the box.
Right.
You have to get creative with your team and brainstorm on different ideas to help a person who sometimes can't help themselves initially.
Yep. Absolutely. And, moving somebody from a 3rd floor to a 1st floor unit, like there's costs associated with that. But you know what, the costs were less than fixing the floor in the 2nd floor apartment every time there was water damage.
There was another question about, is it a standard for the home visit requirement? And it is. For our HUD requirements, that 2 times a month is required. So it is mandated. It's part of the requirements that when you do an outreach and you talk to the participant on accepting that part, so Housing First has no strings in itself, but you do, that is a part that you have to sign that agreement that Andrew talked about of agreeing for 2 home visits a month.
Yeah, because the folks that we are working with are really folks that can exist just outside of a hospitalization, right? So we need to be in the unit checking on folks to make sure they're okay and to make sure that they are safe. I don't want to get too much into the details of funding because that's not what our workshop is actually about. If we don't answer these questions and you all want to follow up about it via email, we're happy to do that, but I'm going to keep us moving because we have just a couple of minutes left. So if you have questions more specifically about the Housing First model, about harm reduction, and about kind of like the application, please continue to ask those. And if you have other questions outside of that, that's what I do all day long for my job, and I'm happy to hop on a phone call or an email with you about some of that other stuff. A thing I want to emphasize is like success is going to look different for different people. Because the Housing First model is based on consumer choice, it's hard to anticipate how that unfolds for every person who comes through the doors, right? Sometimes success is just keeping somebody housed. We are going to see folks who make tons of progress and get their mental health under control and stop using substances, and they get a job, and then they eventually move out into an apartment all on their own and don't need our support anymore. That does happen sometimes. It's not super common, but it happens sometimes, right? For other folks that seem like they're stagnating, we need to reflect on what are the client's goals, not ours, right? And what's realistic for that particular person. Not everybody is shooting for the stars, right? And we want to celebrate any success, any positive incremental change that happens. Jeff, you look like you were going to say something.
I'm just smiling because we do have an alumni association now. So we do have a few more people within the past few years who have maintained so much stability that they actually are transitioning off of our program. So that's a very good success.
And a quick note, before we close out here, I want to talk about landlords. Landlords are going to be probably our most valuable resource, right?
This is key.
We started with probably like 5 to 10 landlords in 2008. We're currently working with over 65 landlords. It is really important to keep those folks happy. And we do that, by having these genuine relationships based on partnership. That means we tell our landlords the truth. We set realistic expectations with our landlords and assure that we're going to be responsive when a problem arises, right? If we know we're moving somebody into a unit and that they're kind of a handful, we're going to let the landlord know that. We're going to give them a heads up, and maybe we're going to pay them a little bit more than they were asking for rent for their troubles, right? Like there are things that we can do to make that relationship smooth and easy, right? We also want to make sure our landlords understand that they're making a valuable contribution to ending homelessness in their community. Landlords care about that type of thing, right? There's lots of people who are really invested in helping out and making a difference. We also, oh, Jeff, go ahead.
I found it helpful, not just with the landlords, but when we've housed people on our teams, I've encouraged my staff to give out their cards to some of the neighbors, because people want to have a place where they can voice if they have a concern or a worry. And sometimes just hearing them out can make them feel more receptive to having a participant who's living next to them who they might not feel like is ideal. Because we're, into community inclusion, we want our participants to feel accepted and not judged by their peers and their neighbors. So building that relationship with not just the landlords, but the community members is helpful.
Yep. Someone asked, how long can we fund someone? Even if they're not motivated, they don't make attempts to move forward, you continue to support forever. If that person's mental health, substance use disorder, and other medical concerns, things of that nature, indicate that they still need support from us, yes, we continue to support them. So there's no benchmarks that people need to meet in order to stay in the program. We don't want to, also the flip side of that is like, we don't want to disincentivize people getting better either, right? If we say, you've checked off X, Y, and Z on this journey, okay, you're done, it's time for you to go. That could stagnate people as well, right? But again, all of this is individualized. So if we notice that someone is just not doing anything ever, it's not like we ignore that. There's going to be ongoing conversations with the clinical team about why that's happening, right? It probably is happening because that person, we're not actually prioritizing or centering their goals. The benefits to landlords working with us is that simple things like sharing vendors with them, but we're accountable and dependable, right? Our landlords know that the rent is going to get paid. If somebody, in one of their units that works with us is having some behavioral concerns, they know that that's going to be addressed. If there's damages, we have, maintenance specialists on staff that can go in and repair things. And we're also responsive to community complaints. So we want to be empathetic with folks, but we're also realistic. We're seeing some increase in complaints from neighbors because our people are home more often now because of the pandemic, right? But, landlords have problems with tenants all the time and don't usually have someone to call to be like, can you help me out with this problem? So actually, having us as a resource is hugely beneficial to folks. And I do want to mention like other resources you should be looking for in your community, right, to partner with. No one expects that year one program can meet every single need a person has, right? Housing First and harm reduction can address a lot of areas, but not everything. So some of the community partners you should be looking for is there a local harm reduction program or syringe exchange that can help with that? Who's your primary health care provider you're connecting folks with? If you don't have one on site, establish a relationship with somebody in the community that can provide those services to your folks. You probably want to know somebody at your local crisis response center in your local hospital emergency room because our folks, have a high likelihood of utilizing those services towards the beginning of their relationship with the Housing First program.
There's one more question that says, so I'm clear, there's no limit for financial support for the participant. And so you are clear, there is no financial support limit. However, if a participant has income, like that participant has, say, Social Security, we do try to budget to help them meet their needs. But we have many participants who have no source of income. They're considered zero income. And we do laundry support, help them with their SNAP, have to do some type of food bank or clothing bank to help them with the support they need for basic living needs. So it's no limit in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, funding for them to receive services is not limited unless they have outgrown the need for our services. We do ask folks who have income to contribute 30% of that to the program. for a little bit of, buy-in, and that's written into the Housing First model. The agency is not an ATM, obviously. So when folks are just getting set up, we're going to get them furniture, we're going to get them groceries, we're going to get them the housewares they need to live independently. But at a certain point, we're connecting folks to resources in the community to continue to meet those needs as they have them. So if they don't have income, we're not buying groceries for them every single week. We're connecting them to a local food bank and a soup kitchen where they can meet those needs on their own, if that makes sense. So of course, as usual, I over-prepared and we didn't get to talk about everything. But I want to say, around safety and communication and self-determination, we're using person-first language. We're using motivational interviewing tools like the readiness ruler when we're talking about change behaviors. We're thinking of substance use on a continuum of use rather than just this black and white folks who are using or folks who are abstinent. And there's a really great free webinar on our website. If you go to housingfirstuniversity.org. Jeff, can you type that in the chat for me? Housingfirstuniversity.org, you go under resources, and there's a bunch of webinars, and Jeff is in one of them, and it's called, I think, Harm Reduction and Recurrence of Use and the Therapeutic Alliance, and it talks a lot about this stuff, right? Safety-based goal setting, what our personal safety plans look like, and these, I think, are really, really helpful when you're working from a harm reduction approach. As a reminder, this is participant-centered, participant-guided. The key question at every stage when you don't know what else to do is, how can I help, right? That goes with your landlords, that goes with your participants, that goes with your colleagues. When you don't know what else to do, how can I help? So I hope this was helpful for some folks. Housing First University is the training arm of Pathways to Housing PA. We provide training, technical assistance, and consulting. Please reach out. Let us know what follow-up questions you have. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And I think, we have another minute or so if anybody else wants to jump in with a question, but I'll leave this here for you to copy down our information so you can keep in touch with us and follow up. We also, Pathways to Housing PA has a sponsorship page with lots of information available on it, links to our website, links to videos, links to our brochures. Please check those things out. Folks with funding questions, please email me to follow up. I'm happy to get those answered for you.
Thank you.